Okay, let's unpack this. We're looking at a topic that really connects a lot of dots: your brain, your gut, skin, even sleep.
Mhm.
This deep dive is custom tailored for you, and we're focusing on a source that digs deep into one specific molecule, histamine.
Right. And it's fascinating stuff. The source makes it really clear how essential histamine is.
Yeah.
You mentioned brain, digestion, immune
Yeah,
system.
a vital system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, and this is the core issue, when you have too much of it, what the source terms histaminosis,
Hmm.
uh, it can really make you feel quite unwell, profoundly unwell, even.
Right. So our mission here, drawing from this source, is to, help interpret the signals. What symptoms might point this way? How do you recognize it based on this material?
And importantly, what natural strategies does the source suggest for, well, getting things back into balance?
Okay, let's jump right in then. How does this excess histamine actually show up? What kind of symptoms are we talking about according to the source?
Well, it covers quite a range,
Mm.
neurocognitively, headaches, brain fog.
That feeling of just not being sharp?
Yeah, exactly. Migraines too. And sometimes this distinct sensation, like your head is being squeezed, often chronic things, not just a one-off.
Yeah, that's a vivid description from the source. The head squeezed part. Okay, and then digestive.
Big one. The source talks about significant abdominal distension, right after eating, bloating, often painful swelling,
Mm.
and slow digestion, maybe acidity, gastritis, reflux. It's described as this constant, uncomfortable feeling of fullness in the digestive system.
Makes sense if things aren't moving right.
Precisely. The
Okay.
digestive tract is a major player. And then you see it on the surface too, skin and allergy type
Oh.
symptoms. Flushing, like sudden skin redness.
Okay.
Sneezing, an itchy nose, throat, eyes, just general allergic feelings. And the source also mentions skin rashes, eruptions, intense itching without an obvious cause, like an insect bite you can't find.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, because for so many of those, the sneezing, itching, flushing, the go-to reaction is often, okay, take an antihistamine.
Right? Symptom relief.
But the source really pushes us, doesn't it? It asks, why is the histamine high to begin with? It wants us to look beyond just blocking the reaction.
It absolutely does. It's about finding the root cause.
Yeah.
Beyond those areas, the source also highlights issues with sleep and fatigue.
Ah.
It mentions this overwhelming sleepiness, sometimes right after a meal. But then, paradoxically, if you do manage to nap, you might wake up just, say, 2 hours later, feeling completely unrested.
And unable to get back to sleep.
Exactly. So extreme fatigue that kind of alternates with this really interrupted, poor quality sleep, that pattern is described.
Wow.
And maybe surprisingly, for some, dizziness, even a feeling of like permanent instability, is also on the list of potential symptoms.
Okay, so headaches, brain fog, gut pain, bloating, rashes, itching, weird sleep patterns, fatigue, dizziness. That's a huge spectrum. It really underlines how many different jobs this molecule must have if an excess can cause such varied problems.
It really does.
So let's dive into some of those jobs. What does the source outline for histamine when it's, working correctly? Digestion seems primary.
Oh, absolutely crucial for healthy digestion. The source explains its role in stimulating gastric acid HCl production right in the stomach.
Okay.
It's a specific process involving certain cells in the stomach lining called G cells. They release a hormone, gastrin, especially when food arrives.
Right.
Gastrin then signals other cells to release histamine, and that histamine signals for the HCl production.
And we need that HCl to break down food properly, right? To actually get the nutrients out.
Precisely. Without enough HCl, food doesn't degrade the way it should before it moves on to the small intestine for absorption. And the source points out a dysfunctional stomach often means low HCl.
Makes sense.
But histamine's role isn't just in the stomach. Further down, in the intestine, it affects motility. That's the movement, the contractions that push food along.
Okay.
So it impacts bowel regularity, nutrient absorption, and even how your body manages that whole complex ecosystem of gut microbes.
So it's helping break food down and making sure it moves through the system properly. What about its role in the brain? You mentioned neurocognitive symptoms.
Yeah, the source describes it as a neurotransmitter, active
Wow.
in specific brain regions. It plays a part in managing appetite,
Okay.
and it's particularly important for regulating the sleep-wake cycle.
Which connects right back to those fatigue and disrupted sleep symptoms we talked about.
Exactly. And the source notes that things like poor diet or, really inconsistent sleep patterns can directly mess with this histamine function in the brain, potentially feeding into those problems.
And then there's the immune connection. Most people probably associate histamine with allergies.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the source confirms its importance there. In an immune response, histamine causes vasodilation, widening blood vessels, and it increases their permeability.
Making them leakier.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
It makes it easier for immune cells to get out of the bloodstream and travel to where they're needed, like a site of infection or tissue injury that needs repair. It helps modulate inflammation.
So it's part of the normal defense and repair system. But if there's too much,
Then it can sort of overactivate or perturb the immune system. It might contribute to chronic inflammation or cause an exaggerated response to things that shouldn't really be a major threat.
okay, so we've got the symptoms, we've got the roles. Now let's get to the core puzzle the source tries to piece together. Why does this excess happen?
The source points towards a central issue, right? It's about the body not managing or recycling histamine effectively.
That's the key idea.
Good.
And it comes down to a couple of main enzymes described in the source. The big one for handling histamine coming from your digestion is DAO diamine oxidase.
GAO. Yeah.
Then there's another one, H&MT histamine N-methyltransferase. This one works more within the body's tissues. It's important for managing histamine involved in, say, inflammation and tissue repair processes.
And the source basically says if these enzymes aren't working well, if there's a deficiency or they're just not active enough, you end up with histaminosis.
That's the direct link it makes. But the million-dollar question the source raises is, why? Why would your body struggle to make or use these enzymes properly?
And this is where the source offers, I think, one of its most critical insights. It talks about these vicious cycles within the body that actually impair the whole histamine recycling system.
So it's not just like bad luck with genes or eating too much aged cheese.
Exactly. The source digs deeper than that. One major cycle it discusses involves gut health. It kind of poses that chicken or egg question.
Right.
Does an imbalance in your gut microbes dysbiosis trigger the histamine problem? Or does the excess histamine itself actually cause the dysbiosis by changing the gut environment?
And the answer is,
The source suggests it's often a self-perpetuating cycle.
yeah.
Gut dysfunction impairs histamine recycling, and then the excess histamine further disrupts the gut. They feed each other.
That makes a lot of sense, especially thinking about histamine's role in gut motility and managing those microbes we talked about earlier.
Yeah. Then there's another connection the source makes that's really fascinating. Stress and cortisol.
Ah, the stress hormone.
Right. Now, the source doesn't say stress itself is bad. Short-term stress helps us adapt, solve problems, build resilience.
Sure.
But it's the persistent high levels of cortisol that chronic, ongoing stress, maybe from unresolved issues or just constantly dwelling on problems, that's identified as a major factor in poor histamine recycling.
Wow. So what's fascinating there is that the source is saying this chronic stress isn't just a mental or emotional feeling. It triggers an actual physiological block. It cripples your body's ability to break down its own histamine.
That's the mechanism it describes.
A direct biological link between chronic worry or pressure and physical symptoms like insomnia, appetite shifts, chronic inflammation, all potentially tied back to this histamine issue.
It's a critical connection, and the source also emphasizes the role of key organs in this whole recycling picture. The liver and the kidneys are crucial.
The body's filters and processing plants.
Essentially, yeah, they're vital for clearing histamine. So if these organs aren't functioning optimally, maybe due to issues like SIBO.
Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Right, or ongoing dysbiosis, fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, even just general metabolic overload on the kidneys. Any dysfunction there directly impairs their ability to recycle histamine effectively.
Which connects right back to those broad symptoms we started with, the headaches, fatigue, digestive pain. They could all be downstream effects of these deeper problems with metabolism and waste recycling, which includes histamine.
It all loops together. The body systems are definitely not isolated.
Okay. So if someone's listening and thinking, wow, some of those symptoms sound familiar, and they suspect maybe histaminosis is linked to these underlying issues, gut health, stress, organ function, what does the source suggest about finding solutions? It really seems to push for an integrative approach.
It does. First, it notes that confirming histaminosis can often be done clinically, looking at the whole picture, sometimes alongside specific blood tests, particularly looking at DAO enzyme levels.
Okay, so confirmation is possible. Now, the source does mention the low histamine diet. It lists foods high in histamine or that trigger its release, contracting them with fresher, less processed options.
Yep, that's in there.
But it also asks a really important question, doesn't it? Does just changing your diet get to the base of the problem?
Exactly. It kind of challenges that idea. It points out that if the underlying issue is really rooted in, say, poor recycling capacity because of chronic stress or gut problems or sluggish liver function, then just restricting histamine intake might only give partial or temporary relief.
Mm.
It even links the rise in environmental allergies, pollen, dust mites, things like that, back to those chronic cortisol issues, suggesting the problem is often deeper than just what you happen to eat that day.
So the source really emphasizes tackling the foundations. What are the top priorities it highlights for intervention?
Lifestyle first. Absolutely.
Mhm.
The top priorities that it lists are lowering that persistent stress and chronic cortisol, achieving truly restorative sleep, not just time in bed.
Quality over quantity.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Eating real, nutrient-dense food consciously, engaging in regular movement and physical exercise,
Yeah.
and getting contact with sunlight and nature.
So basically, improving your overall epigenetic habits, those daily lifestyle choices that influence how your genes actually behave, that's the fundamental layer for correcting the base problem, according to the source.
That's the core message. And then alongside those foundational changes, the source talks about targeted support, using specific compounds that can help, often by supporting enzyme function or related systems.
Okay, like what? L-glutamine is mentioned.
Yes, L-glutamine comes up for its role in helping to support, maybe even close up, the digestive barrier. The idea is that a healthier gut lining assists with histamine management and recycling.
Makes sense. And quercetin.
Quercetin, too, especially in a liposomal form for better absorption. It's highlighted because it helps modulate histamine release from mast cells.
Those are the immune cells and tissues.
Right, key players in inflammation and repair. So quercetin helps balance that part of the immune system's response involving histamine.
Okay. And zinc and vitamin C often come up in immune discussions.
They're mentioned here, too, for supportive roles. Zinc helps modulate the immune system generally and is noted specifically for aiding histamine management. Vitamin C is cited for its role in actually aiding histamine degradation and recycling.
What about B vitamins? The source points to vitamin B6 or P5P?
Yeah, P5P is the active form. It's included because it's known to be a crucial cofactor, like a helper molecule, that enhances the function and modulation of that DAO enzyme.
The main gut histamine enzyme.
Exactly, helping DAO do its job better.
Can you just supplement with the DAO enzyme itself?
The source mentions that, yes, taking exogenous or supplemental DAO enzyme is an option, but it comes with a really strong caveat.
Which is?
It should primarily be considered for a limited time if a DAO deficiency is actually confirmed by a blood test. And critically, it must be used alongside correcting those underlying root causes we've been talking about, the stress, the gut health, etc.
So just taking the enzyme likely won't fix the problem long term if the reason it's low isn't addressed.
That's the strong implication from the source. It's not a magic bullet on its own.
Got it. Magnesium is also mentioned as a common helper.
It is. Magnesium is a cofactor for loads of enzymes, including some involved in managing histamine. The source notes magnesium citrate is common, but also specifically mentions magnesium threonate
Why threonate?
for its potential benefits with the neurocognitive symptoms and its ability to help modulate those mast cells we mentioned earlier.
Interesting. And finally, it's supporting the liver. You called it the recycling lab.
Yeah, the source suggests supporting liver function using compounds like NAC-acetylcysteine or maybe liposomal glutathione. The thinking here is to give the liver the raw materials and fuel it needs to work optimally, since it's a primary site for clearing histamine and many other things.
Okay, one more thing, probiotics. The source discusses them, but with a serious note of caution.
A very significant caution, yes.
Yeah.
It strongly recommends using specific probiotics only after some kind of analysis, like a detailed stool test, identifies exactly which microbial families are lacking or perhaps overgrown in your specific gut.
Not just grabbing any bottle off the shelf.
Definitely not. The source warns that taking probiotics indiscriminately, just hoping they'll help, could actually backfire and potentially worsen symptoms if you introduce strains that aren't right for your particular imbalance.
So it really all comes back to what the source emphasizes again and again, the need for individualization.
Absolutely. Overcoming histaminosis, as presented in this source material, is clearly not a one-size-fits-all deal. It requires an individualized, integrative, functional approach, systematically addressing your specific points of dysfunction, whether it's primarily stress, gut issues, organ support, confirmed enzyme problems, based on your unique clinical picture and analysis.
Okay, so let's recap briefly. Histamine, incredibly complex molecule, essential functions all over the body. But when your system struggles to manage it, the symptoms can show up in really diverse, sometimes confusing ways.
Headaches, gut issues, skin, sleep.
Right. And the crucial insight from the source is that really addressing histaminosis effectively means going way beyond just, say, avoiding certain foods or popping antihistamines.
Yes, symptom management isn't the full picture.
It requires digging into and correcting the underlying root causes. And those roots, according to this source, are often deeply tangled up with persistent stress, gut health, how well your recycling organs are working, and your enzyme activity. And tackling all that requires an integrative, individualized plan.
That's the essence of it.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, thinking about this connection. If something like chronic stress levels or just how efficiently your body recycles its own chemistry are so directly linked to seemingly unrelated symptoms,
Mm.
chronic headaches, gut pain, weird skin rashes, broken sleep,
Yeah.
what other common persistent symptoms that maybe we dismiss or treat superficially might actually have a hidden root cause in how our body is handling its internal environment, its own biochemistry? It really raises an important question, doesn't it?
Thinking about those fundamental connections, stress, gut, detox, inflammation, it can definitely shift your perspective on a lot of chronic health complaints.
Absolutely. Well, we hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights and maybe, just maybe, a completely fresh perspective on symptoms that you or perhaps someone you know might be experiencing.